Welcome back to the Gen 20 podcast. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Marina.
And today we're joined again by Alissa Carpenter, who will be sharing her feedback to your experiences with your horrible bosses. So welcome back, Alissa.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're super excited to jump into this. So let's just jump into the stories and experiences.
Yeah, so we reached out to our audience just through social media and asked for some terrible boss stories. And I think we could go through and discuss each of them and figure out what options there are. So this one, I'll just read this first one from Danielle. She mentions a time that she was working for kind of a small company. She said she was promoted to supervisor, and when she was promoted, she saw there was a Slack chat, which I think in 2020, everyone uses Slack or some kind of like electric communication device. I just sounded 100 years old. Electric mail. So she writes, the previous supervisor who had been at my station had left open a private chat with another supervisor in Slack where they were saying disrespectful and inappropriate things about a lower level coworker. I was disgusted and upset, so I went to the manager, and what do you know? I got in trouble. I was reprimanded for pointing this behavior out and told that as a supervisor, I was going to see a lot of things I, quote unquote, won't like and would have to, quote unquote, look the other way. As far as I'm aware, the other supervisors who had been engaging in the inappropriate discussion through our work messaging app were not reprimanded, and the other higher up supervisors who were not involved approached me later and told me what I had done was wrong. So basically, she writes about how she came across an issue, she called it out, and was then reprimanded for essentially doing the right thing. What would you say about this, Alissa?
So it's a tough position because sometimes that could be a little bit tattletaling on like, this is what's this said in here and this is what's here. But I think you need to advocate for that individual. And it would even be worth having a conversation with the person who said it or who initiated it of like, I feel a little bit differently about this person. This was my experience with that individual, and share some highlight, like essentially a highlight reel of what they've done. Can you tell me a little bit more about this instance? Is there anything that I can do or help with, especially if they're that person's supervisor, to be able to navigate that space? Because I think this goes along with anything in that diversity space. I mean, you're always going to see people, and I think you have to call it out and you have to bring it to the attention of other people. And if that manager wasn't receptive, quite honestly, I would, and you have written documentation, like this is all here. This isn't just a hearsay thing. If it continues, I would bring it up with human resources, to be honest, because if they're willing to say this in this closed quote unquote forum that's still all of there for people to read, what else are they saying and what else are they doing, and not owning up to it, I think is just really crappy. But I would first talk to the individual and have that conversation and try to advocate for that individual if you feel comfortable. And then if this type of behavior continues, I would really bring it up to human resources.
Alissa, I agree. I think especially now more than ever, as we are learning in diversity spaces and how to be allies, we can't always expect this person who's on the receiving end of bad behavior to be able to stand up for themselves, because that's not always the case. So I think it's really important. I would have done the same thing as Danielle is. I would have brought it up. I would have called it out, because this kind of bad behavior does need to be looked at. But there are definitely the potential for there's potential repercussions, and in this case it sounds like she didn't have a good environment, and back to what you're saying, like that probably would never change. And I know her, I know that she doesn't work there anymore, so it sounds like she was able to just leave that environment eventually. But it's important to kind of remind each other that the only way that change will come from toxic environments, racist, sexist, etc., is if we continue to have those conversations and push back and say, no, we're not going to accept the way that you treat each other or me or whoever.
I give her so much credit for doing that. I feel like that takes so much courage, and especially because it's really behind that person's back, right? So that person has no idea what was being said about them, and I just commend her for taking that extra step to talking to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, it's Nicole.
And Marina.
And we're popping in to say that we're launching a product. The Capsule Collab is our curated box with themed collections. Check us out at thecapsulecollab.com and on Instagram at thecapsulecollab. Yeah. So the next one that we have is, I think this is kind of interesting personally, but Elizabeth M says she had a boss who used to email us in all caps when they were angry with them.
It's
Which,
it's almost a generational thing sometimes, and I
yeah,
don't know. But even like bringing that to the attention, I think is fine. It's a conversation of like, not that this is ridiculous, but let's have a conversation about it. Going back and forth in angry emails
yeah,
going to be the best. What is the best way to communicate with you when you're frustrated about something? Because the angry caps just means okay, now she's angry, but we're not resolving any issues. We're not going back and forth. So
yeah,
even calling or FaceTiming or whatever function you use, like I noticed you were upset about it based on how I received this email. What can we do to resolve the issue?
yeah. I think it's just really interesting because it's immediately like, oh, I know they're angry. Like, I don't have to like read between the lines of these periods and exclamation points. Like, but I think it's a really good point to kind of take it to the next step and be like, okay, so I understand you're upset about this. Like, let's chat face to face and figure out how we can fix it and like not have the same issue going forward.
Exactly.
Yeah, and again, it highlights like the clarifying communication. This is another Elizabeth from social media who writes she had a boss who tried to fire Elizabeth's colleague for leaving the office at 4:45 p.m. for a medical appointment. So there could be more to the story or less, but what would you say to that, Alissa?
So for that, my guess, I'm making the assumption obviously that there might have been more to the story of one, how did they communicate that they were leaving for medical appointment or otherwise? And it was that the appropriate way, or was there a different alternative way that they didn't know about? Because it seems, I don't know, this could be the worst, most toxic boss ever who just gets really frustrated over everything. Um, but maybe they weren't allowed to leave because there was a specific meeting or something was happening. And it also seems like, based on some of the other information that Elizabeth shared, that they weren't even aware of their own toxic behavior. So it was, I'm going to do one thing, but I'm going to show you something else. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to exhibit this behavior and not really pay attention, leave and come and go as I want, but you need to be here during certain times. So it seems like there might have been something else. So I would again clarify, what is the best way to let you know that I won't be here? Do I need to give you 24 hours in advance notice? Am I supposed to set my calendar up so you know that I'm leaving? Were they expecting you to be somewhere at a certain time? Once you have that and get that in writing, if something else happens, pull it back, right? Last time that we had this conversation, I was told that I needed to email you 24 hours in advance, which I have. So you can kind of go back and you have that as your, I don't want to say like CYA type of thing, but
Yeah,
when you
like
have clarity, it's good.
yeah, I think I agree. Like you know your rights as an employee. I had one job where I mentioned to my boss that I like needed to make a dentist appointment. I think I was asking for a recommendation because I had just moved to a new city, and he said, "Oh yeah, well just so you know, we do have a policy. Like you can leave for like up to 2 hours if you have a medical appointment." I was like, "Oh, that's great to know." So I could schedule it during the workday. So there are, I'm sure, some policies where you can do that, and like you said, just understanding expectations of communication so that you can like essentially have a paper trail if things go wrong so that you
And
can say
I've
like
done that before where it must have been a couple months into one of my jobs and I got really sick. I had the flu. I wasn't sure who. I never asked who was I supposed to call out to, or it was supposed to be an email. And I had emailed and called my supervisor who was in meetings all morning and didn't get the email. So students were waiting for me and had no idea. Nobody else had any idea that I wasn't going to be there. But I didn't, not that it's always back on you, but I didn't ask for clarity and the supervisor didn't give me that information when I started. So it was just a whole bunch of confusion.
so yeah. And this I think a lot of times when you're starting a new job, it's overwhelming, right? You're getting onboarded, you're getting the lay of the land. It can be hard to figure out what you should ask until you're in the position where it's like, oh man, I have the flu. I should have asked beforehand. That's happened to me where something came up and I was just like, I might be dying. I cannot make it to my desk today. I don't know who to call. Um, Another person writes, Tala from Instagram writes, a boss told us we weren't allowed to be late to meetings. That makes sense. But then would show up 20 to 30 minutes late to the meetings with coffee in hand. And I think that I definitely have experienced that as an employee and a meeting where I was always very timely, but the higher ups were not. What do you say to that? What would you?
I feel like I am Tala situation. And it's interesting. So I've also experienced where people are late to meetings because the other meeting that people were running ran over. So we started to have a conversation that I brought up with my team was instead of doing our meetings, we probably can get everything done in 50 minutes to give people the
Mhm.
10 minutes to go to and from their next meeting. Because it just became this trickle down effect because it was a bunch of people in the same department that were having meetings with each other. So we had a conversation about adjusting it. But I think one, modeling the behavior, so you showing up on time, and then pulling your supervisor aside and just say, I wanted to clarify and make sure that this was the start of our meeting, or do you think it would be better if we push it past? Like, is this a consistent pattern this person has where they're doing 9 o'clock in the morning meetings on Mondays and they're always 20 to 30 minutes late with their coffee in hand? Maybe we should push our meeting back 30 minutes. Let us get settled and see if we can answer emails, get things done, give us some time, and then we can get started right at 9:30. So if this is a consistent pattern, I think you can be nice about it. I think you can say, not that this is not the best use of our time, but maybe if we push back the meeting 30 minutes, we might be able to do more or get additional work done before it starts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a good example for like the potential to communicate with or without frustration, because obviously I'm someone who's always on time, always early, and when people are late without prefacing like, hey, something came up, I get irrationally furious. But obviously you don't want to communicate from that emotion. And so I think learning to, and even if you're writing it down to figure out how to talk about it beforehand, it's really important to say, okay, obviously this is frustrating. How can I communicate without using my frustration as like a weapon? Because yeah, it's really easy to be angry about something, but it's harder to sit down and say, okay, there's an issue with the timing of these meetings. Is there some way we can resolve it? And it
Yeah.
could just be that that boss was crummy, but
But it's also too of sometimes you want to just be like, oh my God, like where's my coffee? Or, call them out right at the middle of the
mhm,
meeting, but make it more of a one-on-one conversation about a suggestion that you have, or maybe it would be more efficient if we did it 30 minutes later. Like, don't make this a calling out your supervisor in the middle of everyone else, because that's not going to make it any better. And
yeah,
it's more of a managing up situation about the expectations and what can happen. But yeah, don't call them out in the middle of everybody as much as you really, really want to.
yeah, yeah. No good comes from calling people out unless it's like a positive, like, hey, shout out to Alyssa. She really pulled her weight and we love her. Like, that's good. But not so much like, great job, Alyssa. Thanks for bringing everything down. Don't do that.
Thanks for forgetting my coffee order. Exactly.
Yeah, where's coffee for the rest of us? It's like in school if you're ever chewing gum and the teacher would say like, "Do you have enough for everyone?" Then you can't have it. Like maybe don't do that.
Right?
Yeah.
Spot on.
So this next one is really interesting. I bet that happens more often than not, which is unfortunate. But Tanya writes, I brought a great idea to my manager only for him to not take it seriously. And then a week later, he presented it back to me verbatim as this great idea for the direction of leadership that the group had decided to go in. So clearly he had taken her idea, presented it, and gotten great feedback. And she said, I've never seen a manager stumble as much as he did when I called him out for it, but I also never got credit for that idea. So what do you do when something like that happens? When you're clearly like, I don't like the word power, but like you don't have the power in the situation. Your manager's the authority and is taking credit for your work or for your ideas. How do you work around that? How do you advocate for yourself?
Yeah, and I actually have a part of my book too on it. It's called Privilege Explaining. When people are
Mhm.
in a position of power in any type of way, it could be gender, actual role, seniority, that type of thing. The Really, I wouldn't call them out in that particular situation, but I think you can go from there. Or thank you for sharing my idea, John, as we talked about earlier last week. I think you can very much call it out, but not in a negative way. Of, I'm so glad you brought up what we had talked about last week in the break room, or thank you for bringing the idea that I brought to you. I also think you can ask questions or follow ups to that individual, and not in a snarky way, but questions or follow ups where somebody who had the idea or did the research ahead of time would know the answer to, and somebody who didn't wouldn't. Um, like, what did you think about this in relation to X company or this client, and then you can pop in with your idea. Or when I did this in a previous company, this is what it looks like. So assert what you know, assert your intelligence without calling that person out in a negative way. I think the group, the room will get the idea that you either thought of it, know of it, have more experience, but you're doing it in a very, and polite's not the right word, but like a politically correct
Yeah.
space. And adding on to the idea and adding your value. Because, quite frankly, if they're sharing your idea, since it's not theirs, they're probably missing components to it. So there are things you're going to want to add anyway. Just
Hmm.
add to their concepts and go back to thank you for sharing what we talked about or bringing up your idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it probably happens more often than we want to hear about, and that brings up an interesting point of office politics, which happen everywhere. Big company, small company, family owned company, corporation, doesn't matter where, but it happens everywhere. And that was something I really struggled to learn about because in one of my last jobs, there was very much like a hierarchy, and you kind of had to play the game in office politics, which for me, did not compute. I didn't know how to play the game. I had no interest, and I ultimately realized that I meant more to be an entrepreneur and like a solo business owner, because while there's still political things you have to deal with, I realized I need to be my own boss. But for people who are in those environments, like how do you deal with office politics, whether they're kind of just how things are run or favoritism? Like, what do people do?
I'm the worst with office politics because I don't play the game. Like I don't want
Yeah.
to kiss somebody's butt and like be in this person's face over this person to get to where you go. And this sounds again probably really cheesy, but I always believe in kindness and
Hmm.
just working with people and getting to know the people around you. And quite frankly, like if you're trying to get in the headspace or a meeting or with somebody like your C-suite executives or higher up supervisors, it's not them that you need to get in with. It's really their secretaries, their receptionists, the people below, the ones who control their calendars. And by building relationships with people in general, you'll get there. And I wasn't doing it to build the relationships to get to that space. But if I noticed people were really stressed out at the front desk when I worked in higher education, students were coming in and out. Here's some donuts. I didn't even say they were from me to sit at the front desk for them to kind of, or get coffee or whatever. Build relationships with people for the sake of building those relationships to help them do their job better, be their support system. What can I do to help you through this time? I see that you're struggling. Who can I connect you with? And that in turn, by no means is playing office politics, but you'll be known as the person who's helpful, who is resourceful, who gets things done. So be you, but find a way to do it, and not this I'm doing it for something else, right? Like do things for the sake of doing it to be better within the organization, to move it up, not because you want something in return.
Yeah, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but it makes me want to point out, like, at the end of the day, we are not our jobs, so we need to be working as ourselves to our best of our ability, hopefully in a way that is kind and helpful, because again, all you can do at the end of the day is go home and be happy with how you've handled situations.
Oh, totally. I think what makes it so tough now is sometimes we get so wrapped up our identity as our job and our, especially like just being at home and all these other spaces. But it's important to realize that it's not who you are, it's what you do. There could be a who you are element of it. I think what makes you a good person or what you do personally can make you better at your job and vice versa. But it's important not to get them confused, right? Your job should not overrun all of your life.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have one more testimonial or quote, I guess, from Kelly. She says, "My last manager threatened to fire me over exaggerated technicalities twice. It seemed like he was trying to find a way to fire me, even though I was his number one salesperson, consistently opening new accounts every month. And the day I left the company after 4 years of working for him, his thank you to me was a free cup of coffee from a hole punch card. It really felt like a in the face from him, especially because I helped build his small business and generated about $1.5 million in revenue. Also, I found out after I left the company that once the second quarter ended, I actually did so well that I earned 2 company bonuses, which he refused to pay out.
Wow.
This sucks.
And it's and I guess I'm probably reading into it, but some of it can be, I don't want to say jealousy, but I've seen so much of that with kind of newer generations coming in and doing these things twice as fast, more efficient, making
Mhm.
things happen, but not realizing why that's happening. People who've been there for a really long time. I'm glad this person left. It seems like such a crappy, I'm glad Kelly left. It seems like such a crappy situation to be in, and some people just get caught up unnecessarily in the details, and it seems unnecessary details because it said like exaggerated technicalities. But I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think for this person, it seems like the best thing they could have done was leave. It just seemed like they were just not, they were doing so much and putting so much effort and time into their job, into the organization, and they weren't getting it in return, even in a thank you, even a like, thank you for, it was almost just like a push off. And, to make matters worse, I would rather have gotten nothing than a free
Mhm.
lunch card for coffee. Like,
Yeah.
just say goodbye and don't give me this like, oh, I found something in my wallet I totally forgot that I had kind
Yeah,
of.
like, "I found this on the street. Would you like it?"
Yeah, it's almost insulting, I would say.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and it's a kind of like, I think this is a big generational thing that we're all experiencing as millennials that is different from our parents' generation, is that, like, loyalty is no longer a thing in that, in either way. Our parents' generation might go work for a company and be there for 30 years or 40 years and then retire. And now between the economy and the job opportunities and just sometimes having to get a new job in order to grow your career, that time isn't put in. And I think, you know, I, while I've always tried to work very hard for every company I've ever worked for, I've never been loyal to the company because I knew the company wasn't loyal to me.
Mhm.
And so, in that being meaning, I'm not going to kill myself over this job when I know that the foundation of the company isn't going to then help my career grow, because most of the time when I was in a role, as when I got to the furthest along in the role I could, there was no more room for growth. So why would I stay loyal to a company that isn't going to help me continue to grow? And to Kelly's point, or to Kelly's story, it's, she can't be loyal. She worked so hard, and look what she got in return. No true growth, no true fulfillment. And so we can't give our all to a company or to an organization, because we can't lose ourselves from that, because it's not how it works anymore.
And I think too, even getting clear within the organization of what the word loyalty means, because the definition that you're describing is what so many people are saying. Being loyal is breaking your back or staying here for X number of years, but you were loyal to your job. Like, you did what you were supposed to. You showed up on time.
Hmm.
You left when you're supposed to. You did everything that you could within the company for a certain period of time. Loyalty doesn't mean I'm going to be here and stay here for 25 years, get a pension anymore. So that definition has really kind of changed over time. I think, I mean, I keep trying to think of what Kelly might have been able to and do differently through her time there, but I think just getting pieces, if there was ever a if there's ever a kind of experience that she was having or conversations that she had moving forward, having him even explain, especially those conversations were probably really frustrating for Kelly of, I'm
Hmm.
doing so well, like I'm kicking butt with this company, I'm bringing in all this stuff, and now it's like, stop, you did all of these things wrong. You're like, whoa, 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 like what about all of the things that I did right? So sometimes I even keep, and this isn't to like shove things in people's faces or anything, but if you're finding yourself sometimes wondering if you're good at your job or needing something because you're afraid that you might get fired or something in that way, I print out usually emails from people, because I sometimes you have those like crappy days and you want to know what you're doing is going towards something. So printing out those thank you emails, or you did a really great job with this, whether it's your client or your colleague or other people, and I have a folder and actual cards that people send. So keep
Hmm.
information and documenting that. So if that this individual, and I don't know the size of this company, ever went to human resources and said she messed up these two things, you're like, but wait a minute, these are my sales numbers. This is how many of my clients are really happy with what I'm doing. Like, you have something to show it already there. So you're not going through everything and shuffling through. As things come through, you have your folder that shows all of your worth and what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And even for your future, because when even if you love your job and you want to stay there, but a new opportunity shows up and it's a really good opportunity for you, it's important to have those kind of facts and figures so that when you are looking for a new role for whatever reason, you can say, oh, I generated this much revenue, I helped this many people, I implemented this many things. It's kind of like, I hate writing resumes and I really hate cover letters, but for the jobs you need resumes for, it's helpful to keep that updated as you go versus wait 5 years, realize you want a new job, and then have to think back to like, what did I just do for the last
Oh, yeah.
kind of cover your butt, but also to set yourself up for future success.
Especially if you're in this toxic environment and you're like 1.5 feet, right, or out the door, you automatically have this resume that's done with all these stats and figures that you have. It's a really good point.
Yeah. Alissa, thanks so much. I've gotten so much out of this just listening to other people's experiences and talking about it. So, do you have any last words of wisdom for people who are having trouble in their careers?
Know that you're worth it. You're worth it to be in a place where you feel comfortable, you feel valued, you feel heard, and figure out and first identify what behavior you're willing to deal with and what you really, really want to have conversations on. A lot of the topics and that people have addressed, I think, are very much worth having conversations about because they're in a toxic space. So practice, get comfortable with practice with a colleague, a friend, verbally through email, whatever it is, so you feel comfortable to start and initiate those conversations.
I love it, and I so agree. So, we will link below in the show notes for Alissa's book. And again, if you are wanting to find her online, you can go to her website, notokaythat'sokaycoach.com. And Alissa, thanks again. We adore you and so appreciate your advice.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for one last time, for those of you listening, if you liked what you heard, please leave us a 5-star rating or review or both. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.